Yo, what's going on, y'all? It's Cone back here again today with another video, and today I want to talk for a little bit about Jimmy Butler, a guy that I didn't think I'd be going in depth into until like maybe the end of the summer, where the offseason has kind of come and went. I'm making a video just recapping what almost every team did, and then I get to the Miami Heat and we talk about where they are at the moment and what's it going to be like going into the season for them. That's really the only way I thought I was going to talk heavily about the Heat this offseason, unless they made some big blockbuster deal like they've tried to do over the past couple of years. That wasn't until a couple of weeks ago when, surprisingly, some drama popped up surrounding Jimmy Butler and the Miami Heat, which has surprisingly thrown his future with the franchise a bit into the air. Honestly, up until this all came about, I just presumed that Jimmy Butler would retire as a member of the Heat. He embodies Heat culture almost single-handedly. He's that gritty, high-level playoff performer that has brought them to 2 finals with his tenure as a part of the franchise. It feels like he would eventually get his jersey retired. He would go down as one of the best Heat players of this modern era. It just felt like a perfect fit for both him and Miami. But things kind of change after they got eliminated by the Boston Celtics in the first round a few weeks ago, especially when some comments came from Pat Riley. As usual, after the season wrapped up with the Heat getting knocked out in 5 games by the Celtics, Pat Riley went ahead and did an end-of-season press conference where he was asked a billion questions. There's, I believe, video of it if you want to go check the full thing out. But the piece that really stuck out to everybody was when he was asked about Jimmy Butler's contract extension. If you didn't know, Jimmy Butler is eligible for a contract extension this offseason that would pay him a lot of money. Basically, this is the last year of his deal, and going into next season, he would have a player option. So that means 2025 offseason, Jimmy Butler could be a free agent if he declines his player option, which he does have one for $52 million, but he's seeking a lot more money than that because this possible extension they could offer him right now would go ahead and pay him $113 million over 2 years. So roughly about $60 million per year, which would take him until his age, I believe, 38 season. I don't think you need me to tell you that that is a really, really high amount of money, especially to a guy that would be, again, 38 years old by the end of that contract. So there are always question marks about if or not they should offer it. But again, I always figured they would because it feels like the fit is there. And it still feels like all they have to do is add maybe one more star level player next to Jimmy and Bam and form a big 3. And the Heat could very well find their way to winning the Eastern Conference. I don't think that's out of the question at all. So to me, I've just always assumed they were going to give him that money. But when Pat Riley was asked about this extension, he said, we don't have to do that for a year. Basically have that conversation about giving him the more money on that bigger contract. We have not discussed that internally right now, but we have to look at making that kind of commitment. That's a big decision on our part to commit those kind of resources unless you have somebody who's going to be there and available every single night. That's the truth. That last part, and a little bit throughout this press conference, it seemed like Pat Riley was pretty upset with Jimmy Butler, who was in and out of the lineup this past regular season, has at times not been really locked into regular season games, it feels like. We know about playoff Jimmy where he elevates a lot. I have a friend, my guy Matt, shout out to him, who's a big Heat fan, and there have been a number of times over the course of this regular season and others where he said he wished Jimmy would just try a little bit more in the regular season so they didn't have to go into the playoffs and try to overcome the odds and pull off a number of upsets, what feels like every single year. There have been some concerns about that with Jimmy Butler, and there was also another moment where Pat Riley basically said that if you're not on the court, referring to Jimmy Butler messing with the Celtics, you shouldn't really be talking. So it felt like from those comments, there's a little bit of contention between Pat Riley and maybe the overall Heat front office and Jimmy Butler himself. And this has been compounded by rumors that if Jimmy doesn't get offered that big contract extension that he's looking for, he could start to angle his way out of Miami, whether that's going into next season, playing it out, and then declining his player option and walking in the offseason, or maybe trying to force his way out of Miami here this summer, which never felt like it was on the table. I mean, there are a lot of stars that feel like they could be available, whether it's like Donovan Mitchell or Darius Garland or Jared Allen, all those guys from Cleveland. Maybe some other big names like Brandon Ingram could be available, Trae Young, DeJounte Murray. But Jimmy Butler never felt like a guy that was going to be on the market. But here we are, and according to a bunch of reports, teams are preparing that if Jimmy Butler requests a trade or is seemingly unhappy, getting ready to put together a package to deal for him. The team that's been mentioned the most as a potential suitor for him have been the Philadelphia 76ers, who obviously had Jimmy Butler for half a season. They went to Game 7 in the second round, lost on that Kawhi Leonard shot, and then ended up choosing to pay Tobias Harris and Al Horford over Jimmy Butler, which proved to be a massive mistake. And according to a lot of reports, They know it was a mistake. They want to make it right. And if Jimmy were willing to go there and be traded there, and of course the Heat were willing to send him there because they are an Eastern Conference rival, they would be fully willing to give Jimmy Butler the extension that he would want to basically try and rectify their past mistakes. And they think that bringing Jimmy Butler next to Tyrese Maxey and Joel Embiid could form a championship big three. And honestly, I'm inclined to agree with them. They would be an insane trio. You've got an MVP level guy in Joel Embiid who could have won back-to-back awards if he didn't get hurt this season. You've got Maxey who really elevated himself to an all-star fringe all-NBA level this year and is still only at the beginning of his career, is about to get a big-time extension this offseason. And then Jimmy Butler, who again is a known playoff riser, and now he doesn't have to do everything in the world. One thing that I haven't loved about the Heat the past few years, really in the whole Jimmy Butler era, is having him as the big focal point of the offense. He's really good and he can take on that role, but I've always felt like they needed another scorer next to him. Tyler Hero never really became the caliber of guy that I was hoping he would be. Maybe Rozier and him could kind of in combination do that, but I've always felt like Jimmy would be really good as like a second or a third option that can take over when needed and use a lot more of his energy on defense and just hitting those clutch buckets. With the Sixers, he can do exactly that. Now, they would have to build out a supporting cast around those guys making a ton of money, which may be difficult, but I mean, if you just have that big three and a decent enough supporting cast, I think Philly is immediately one of the favorites in the Eastern Conference. Again, it may be a risk to give a guy getting up there in age like Jimmy Butler all that money, but with Joel Embiid right now being one of the best players in the world and having some injury issues of his own, you don't know how long he's going to be at this level. You have to take advantage, and I think if the Sixers can pull off a Jimmy Butler trade, they should absolutely go ahead and do it. Again, this depends if the Heat are even willing to deal him within the conference or even if it gets traded at all, because it's definitely not a foregone conclusion, but this is something that seems incredibly interesting. And it's not only the Sixers. Like today I saw a rumor that the Warriors would be a team that would be interested in grabbing Jimmy Butler if he became available, and I would imagine if for some reason he gets on the market, a bunch of teams are lining up to go ahead and try and acquire a guy that has proven he can produce at the highest level on the biggest stages. Just off the top of my head, I wouldn't be surprised if like Denver is interested in him, maybe moving off of Michael Porter Jr. in favor of Jimmy. If a team like the Clippers might be trying to do a sign and trade with Paul George, give the Heat back a star, but get back a new guy in Jimmy Butler that could play alongside Kawhi Leonard and give each of them one last run together. Could the Warriors, like I mentioned earlier, try and find a way to bring him in to extend their life into the Steph Curry era as a high-level team? Could the Rockets try and pick him up as a veteran? They've been reported to want a big-name star or just someone who can help them win now. The Knicks have been looking for a star for a while. Could they pursue a guy like Jimmy Butler? You could talk about, I guess, Orlando if he wanted to stay in Florida, although I don't know if they would trade within the state. The Sixers, of course, we talked about them. Maybe the Nets. They're reportedly in the market for a star, although I've gone on record saying I don't love that idea. I think they should go instead rebuild. There are a lot of options for the Heat if Jimmy Butler says he wants out, if they decide they don't want to pay him, and potentially losing for nothing this offseason. I think there's a very realistic world to where Jimmy Butler is not a member of the Miami Heat by the end of next season. It feels hard to even wrap my head around the possibility of this split happening, but at the same time, I do understand from both sides why it feels like it could come to fruition. For Jimmy, he wants to make one last big contract happen, and with him getting up there in age, it could be risky to play out next season without that money being guaranteed because he could get injured, he could show some signs of regression, and suddenly he's not making anywhere near that type of money in free agency like he could have if he got an extension this offseason. Also, the Heat have not done him enough favors, in my opinion, to give him help to compete for a championship. They traded for like Rozier at this deadline, and that's easily the biggest move they've made in the Jimmy Butler era to try and help him compete. Like, Hero has developed into a great player, same thing with Bam Adebayo, but it feels like every time a star player's come around, they've struck out continuously, and anytime there's like a good role player out there in the market too, they don't really find a way to go ahead and pick them up. They have not done a lot to help Jimmy compete with the best teams in the Eastern Conference, like I feel like they should have done for a guy who's been this good throughout his tenure. I don't know if this is something he's actually upset about or not, but I'm just saying from an outside perspective, if he saw it that way, I would get it. And from the Heat side of things, yeah, you probably don't want to be paying a 38-year-old Jimmy Butler $60 million, especially if he's already struggling to stay on the court at times. Maybe they would rather pivot and trade him away and focus more on a timeline for like Tyler Hero and Bam Adebayo, as well as some young guys like a Nikola Jovic, who looked pretty good this offseason. They've got a draft pick this year. They could get back some young players in exchange for Jimmy and some overall draft capital. Maybe they would rather pivot that way than trying to compete right now with Jimmy. Or again, there's a chance they could just swap star for star in some scenarios and try to remain competitive with Bam Adebayo, Tyler Hero, or maybe they trade him in a different deal, as well as whoever they pick up. There are a lot of ways they could go with this deal. Now, I'm not saying this is a done deal, that there is for sure a divorce coming between these two sides. I'm just saying I see the rationale in it from an outside perspective, and it's something interesting to keep an eye on, because of course the Heat have been part of that upper echelon of the Eastern Conference for years, and wherever Jimmy goes, assuming it is already a high-level team, he could very well push them over the top towards legitimate championship contention and close to favorites. That's how good I still think he is, especially in the right scenario. I do want to note that when asked about trading him at that same media availability, Pat Riley flatly said, no, we're not looking to move him. And I believe that. I believe that is their plan. But if that contract extension doesn't come Jimmy's way, and any of the tensions that are seemingly there between the two parties start to escalate, like I think they will if the extension doesn't come, there is, in my eyes, a real chance that Jimmy Butler ends up somewhere else sooner than later. And even if he doesn't get traded this offseason or request one, I think we could start to see that relationship fracture to the point where by the end of next offseason, Jimmy Butler's with a different franchise, something that I did not expect whatsoever throughout these past few years. With all that being said, I appreciate you watching. Leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on future videos. Comment down below what you think happens with the Jimmy Butler situation. Do you believe he eventually will be out of the Miami Heat? Do you think he stays there for the rest of his career? And if he does end up getting traded, what are some spots you would like to see him in? Like, what do you think is the best fit possible for Jimmy to try and compete for a ring, and for the team that acquires him to get the most out of the situation? Again, appreciate you watching a ton. I will see you all later. Real one, say it back.